morning, everybody. Happy Thursday. We have an amazing debate special for everybody today. What do we have, Krystal?
That's right. We've got all of the biggest moments, all of the worst moments, all of the cringiest moments.
Well, the worst moments would be the whole thing.
It wasn't really a moment. It was just the fact that it happened at all. We've got Ryan and Emily coming in studio to talk about it. We also are going to talk about a couple other stories, including updates on what's going on with Bob Menendez and questions over whether they may have been attempting to recruit him as the Egyptian government as an intelligence asset. We've also got big update for Saagar on the dress code situation. Our long national nightmare is over. Thank God. The most important issue in this town. So break all of that down for you. We've also got Cenk Uygur is going to be here in studio talking about his book and also talking about the future for Joe Biden and the Democratic Party. So excited to have him join us as well.
Yeah, that's going to be a lot of fun. We just want to go ahead and say thank you to everybody who's been taking advantage. We've got our debate special discount going on right now. We can put that up there on the screen. It's a 10% off our yearly membership, and it's just we found that at this time, like these memberships, what you guys are doing, you guys are really helping us not only fund our ability to do these specials. We've got Ryan and Emily are going to be joining us soon in the studio. All of the late night work, our crew was up very, very late last night. We're all running on a couple of hours of sleep. We had somebody at the UAW strike just yesterday, on the ground. Jordan Sheridan will be going back with us in partnership. So all this stuff is things that you guys are helping us fund and build here, and we're really, really proud of it, and we're just so proud to be able to have people like you be the sole reason that we're able to do any of it. So breakingpoints.com, once again, you can take advantage of that yearly discount, 10% off.
It's the least we can do, given the state of affairs in this country.
That's right.
At least we can do our part to help ease the burden.
That's correct. Okay, let's get to the actual debate. So we thought that, for many of you, if you didn't actually spend any of the time going through this and all that, we wanted to give you a substantive enough recap to be able to take away most of the awful parts, which is most of what the 2 hours was. Let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen just to give everybody an idea. This was the overall speaking time. So what we have here is Ron DeSantis clocked in at 12 minutes and 27 seconds. This is a big change from last time around. Vivek Ramaswamy at 11 minutes and 53. Here's the big change, Krystal. 10 minutes and 42. Tim Scott tried to have a big night. I think, being the operative word. Chris Christie, 10 minutes and 32 seconds. Mike Pence at 9:35. Nikki Haley at 9:05. And Doug Burgum at 7:35, despite certainly not for his best efforts, because that man was interrupting left and right. And that's also why it's a little even difficult, almost, honestly, to talk about the speaking time, because how can you count it when they're all talking over each other? And I think that'll be a common theme of what we talk about today. On substance alone, of course, for our show, but really for the whole nation, people wanted to say, what do these people have to say about the UAW strike? And there were some revealing answers and moments from that, and we'll break it down on the other side. Let's take a listen.
We should look back at the first bill in Congress under Joe Biden. The first bill had $86 billion for the union pensions because they continue to overpromise yet underdeliver. One of the challenges that we have in the current negotiations is that they want 4-day French work weeks, but more money. They want more benefits, working fewer hours. That is simply not going to stand. I'll say this, Joe Biden should not be on the picket line. He should be on the southern border, working to close our southern border, because it is unsafe, wide open, and insecure.
Patience for the union bosses, I think that's where he and I actually have a common view. I do have a lot of sympathy for the workers, however. People are going through real hardship in this country. I've been through hardship growing up. My father stared down layoffs at GE under Jack Welch's tenure at the GE plant in Evendale, Ohio. My mom had to work overtime in nursing homes in Southwest Ohio to make ends meet and pay off our home loan. So I understand that hardship is not a choice. But victimhood is a choice, and we choose to be victorious in the United States of America.
That was the rhetorical difference between the two, Krystal. Tim Scott kind of bringing up basically he already said, he's like, well, if you're on strike, you should be fired. Nikki Haley backed that up. Doug Burgum took a little bit of the Trump line, mostly in terms of the electric vehicles. Vivek, I think, maybe the only candidate on the stage to say I sympathize with the
Right.
workers' demands. Of course, not coming out and endorsing the cause whatsoever. It's interesting, where we can talk about it now. American Compass, our great friend Oren Cass of the show, put out some new polling about how Republicans feel about unions. And actually, I thought that Vivek's answer probably split the difference at the best. So Republican voters that they found in their poll, 41% had an approval rating outright for unions, and I think it was 56%. That's actually a huge sea change considering that 100% of elected Republicans are against unions. But considering like where that split is, and even just in terms of general independent voters, Vivek tried to split the difference between the traditional Republican line and the emotional sympathy, I guess, to what they are asking for.
Yeah, but in terms of policy, it's not like any of them are actually different from each other with regards to
Probably
unions,
correct.
as far as we know. And so, yeah, I mean, this is the extent of the quote unquote populist shift in the Republican Party, being willing to, sort of say, like, I have a little bit of empathy for the workers, even as you're continuing to spout the same, like, corporate talking points about quote unquote union bosses. But I guess that is a step in the right direction, as opposed to Tim Scott, who would not only want to fire the workers, but want to allow them to suffer in their old age with no pension after Wall Street absolutely destroyed these pension funds during the 2008 crisis. That pension thing, I know it irritates you
Yes,
too.
very much so.
It irritates me so much, because actually the issue is that they didn't bail out these pension funds sooner, after a bunch of Wall Street ghouls basically tanked
Yes.
the central states' pensions. I mean, what he's calling for is like, retirees to suffer and die penniless after they've been promised a decent pension. So anyway, that's just like a particular point of contention for me. But you don't have anybody on that stage who's willing to actually overtly say, I back the workers and I back their claims. It's all just rhetorical shifts, okay, but no real substantive difference from the trajectory of Republican policy over many decades, which is something that we'll see too in terms of Trump's comments and Trump's speech that we'll talk to Ryan and Emily
We're going
about
to talk
later.
about that in a little bit. You're right. I mean, on the Tim Scott thing, it's just one of the most dishonest things I've honestly ever heard, because he's basically blaming the unions for not having their pensions be 100%. One of the reasons why the pensions are underfunded with the mandate is because, as you said, in 2008, they were absolutely destroyed and had to take a haircut after their hedge fund managers and others, and their benefit managers and some of the other financiers that were involved in the process gambled with their funds.
Yes.
And a lot of that even traces back to the fact that many pensions had these rules in place. We can go all Big Short for a while, and they're like, okay, you can't invest in anything, and it's a AAA rated or whatever. And when the rating system, though, was rigged, these poor pensioners had their money completely wiped out. And then that happened again, actually, in 2020. And look, I think public sector union and discussion of all that can be a separate thing, but we are talking here about hardworking retirees who, it's not that the union promised them, by the way, the company also promised them what this was. And the American finance system absolutely wrecked it. That's not the union's fault. If anything, he's making an argument for much more stringent regulation whenever it comes to management of institutional funds, of which so many hardworking people rely on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let me, one more thing on this, because this really gets under my skin.
Yeah.
So the backstory here is that the Central States Pension Fund, this is for Teamsters. So we're talking mostly about truckers, truck drivers, the UPS workers, et cetera. And because there had been so much like corruption and mob ties, whatever, with the Teamsters, they'd been under government decree. So the government was actually closely scrutinizing, watching these pension funds, and put these Wall Street ghouls in charge of it that then gambled with the funds. And of course, they have all these incentives, rather than putting the money in things that are going to be relatively safe, to make these big bets, because they get bigger fees when they do this. And this is a consistent problem that we see with pensions, and it all goes back to Wall Street greed. This pension performed so poorly under the, supposedly bright minds of Wall Street that it actually did better when Jimmy Hoffa was running it and using it as his personal piggy bank. That's how poor their performance was. When you had like a crook at the top who was stealing from the pension fund, the workers actually did better with that than when Wall Street was running it.
Wow.
Just so you know the backstory.
Right. So, well, it raises a more meta question. Who is the real crook? Okay.
Oh, well.
We'll get to that. Something that we were alluding to is that one of the reasons, for those who watch will know what we're talking about, it was very difficult to watch. The moderators had no control. The questions were awful, but most importantly, the candidates themselves, it just turned into a total clown show up there. There was so much crosstalk. Very often, I'm talking 10 whole minute blocks. You had no idea who was talking, what was even debated on the stage. We have a little bit of a mashup that we can show you just to give you a little bit of a taste for those who want to just tune in and be like, okay, so what the hell happened? This is what it was like all night, guys. Let's take a listen.
Honestly, every time I hear you, I feel a little bit dumber for what you say, because I can't believe that here you've got a TikTok situation. They were there before I even showed up at the residence. You are scrapping. You are scrapping. Excuse me. You know I fought taxes.
Here's a fact, though.
I cut taxes. I loaded up our
You wanted a gas tax increase, and then you wanted
Ladies and gentlemen, we not intend to go ahead like this.
Yeah, guys, it was that times probably like 1,000, and it just wouldn't stop. And
it was
honestly,
painful.
I blame the moderators here probably more than anyone. At one point, Dana Perino was like, "We're gonna have to cut your mic." I'm like, "You should have cut his mic 45 minutes ago. Like, what are we doing here?"
Well, and they would just let this go on.
It just went
They
on
didn't even
and
really try
on.
to intervene in many instances. And so, of course, that sets the tone for how everyone's going to approach it. You know, watching it, part of what was so painful about it was, number one, you're right, the moderators were
it was
horrendous.
awful.
The question, even putting aside like all the fights and crosstalk that you couldn't make sense of what anybody was saying, and it was just a pathetic waste of time, the question selection was really bad.
Awful.
Because that union part that we played you, that was the most substantive part of the debate.
And that was in the beginning.
The very first question. And you know what? I listened to that question, I was like, oh, maybe this is going to be
thought the same
interesting.
thing.
No, it was not going to be interesting, because they chose to talk about a lot of issues that all of them agreed with. You know, like they all are going to have the same issue on the border. They're all going to have the same issue on crime. They're going to all have the same issue on quote unquote transgender issue. All this stuff, like they all are the same on these things. The point of these debates is to try to tease out some of the differences that might be interesting that help people make a choice. So the question selection was terrible. The command of the stage was horrendous. And by the way, this isn't like, the one thing I can say for them, they like united the country in disgust.
I agree.
For the way that this debate went down, because everyone I saw in my timeline, left, right, center, didn't matter. It was all like, this was a horrendous waste of time. And you could see how each of the candidates, you know, they're all getting desperate at this point. And that's part of why you had all this like ugliness and like crosstalk, and just it smelled of desperation for all of them. You could feel all of them coming in with their like consultant instructions of how they were supposed to be. And then, you know, clearly Tim Scott got the message of like, you were too passive last time. You need to be more aggressive. So he was trying to pick fights with people left and right and get in on the action. You could see Vivek, it was kind of the opposite. Clearly his consultants had been like, you got to dial it back and be, people didn't like you were too aggressive. You got to be more conciliatory. There was visceral absolute hatred of Vivek across the stage, but especially from Nikki Haley.
The thing is about Vivek is he was like, let's all just be conciliatory up on the stage. He's like, look, you know, we're all Republicans. These are all good people. And it's like, dude, last time he literally said they were all bought and paid for.
Right.
But it's very clear. I know exactly what happened, because it's funny. He telegraphed it a little bit too on the nose. He said, I know a lot of you out there are thinking, who is this guy? He's a little bit of a know-it-all. He's a little too ambitious. I was like, oh my God. What happened is clearly they did a focus group.
Yes.
Those were the top things. And so he's like, let me allay their concerns by addressing them head on. Now, there's a casual way to do it, and it was not the way that he did it. I'm talking about straight to cam, looking at them, just being like, I know that you think that I'm X, Y, and Z, but I'm not X, Y, and Z. And I was like, ooh, it was incredibly cringeworthy. Just the way that it was delivered. I think you're right. I mean, so many of them had these poll tests after poll test after poll tested answers, even the canned attacks. You know, we gave you guys a flavor there about freaking curtains. They were arguing about whether Nikki Haley had purchased too many expensive curtains or whatever for the UN ambassador's residence. I'm just like, oh my God, like that is the lamest possible thing I've ever heard in my life. And this was in the last 7 minutes of the debate, guys. And that's why it was a very fitting, honestly, end to the thing. We did want to pull one matter of substance, which was, and honestly, this is probably outside of the questions about Trump, which, by the way, we're missing. Why were there no real questions about Trump? Are you going to support him? What do you think about the criminal charges? All this other stuff. One of the areas where they obviously wildly disagree. On abortion in particular, there were pointed questions about how are you going to handle this, considering how much of a poison pill it has become for a lot of voters. Let's take a listen.
Because I believe in life, but I also believe in states' rights. And I think we fought hard against Roe versus Wade for decades to say that states should make these decisions.
And I reject this idea that pro-lifers are to blame for midterm defeats. I think there's other reasons for that. The former president, he's missing in action tonight. He's had a lot to say about that. He should be here explaining his comments to try to say that pro-life protections are somehow a terrible thing. I want him to look into the eyes and tell people who've been fighting this fight for a long time.
So I actually thought that was an interesting, spicy moment. We're going to talk with Ryan and Emily about some of the more overt attacks on Trump, which I, of course, found very interesting, just about for him not showing up. But I thought that Chris Christie's answer, and he had the best point. He's like, look, I'm the only guy here who is actually governor of a blue state. And he's like, so obviously, talking about states' rights, it's like that's probably more of a winning element. You could see Mike Pence didn't even have the gumption to like jump in there and defend, his biggest issue. But you also saw, and there's a big fight going on right now behind the scenes. I don't know if people saw, Trump gave an interview recently where he basically implied that a lot of pro-life movement was grifters. He's like, they're always raising money. I guess it's a business or something like that.
Something going on.
Like, every time with him, I'm just like, hey, he's definitely right. But it's one of those where it's just funny always to hear somebody say that. It's just, look, to me, that's one of his political strengths. He can piss off supposedly one of the most vital parts of the coalition. I saw a poll yesterday, Krystal, which says that GOP voters believe that Trump is the person of most faith in the entire race. That's why, he could get away with it if he wants to. I don't know who these people are fooling themselves. And by the way, if you're like a Christian and you're like, well, I think he's the leader who will accomplish what I want most, fine. But to be like, no, you know what? That's a God-fearing man right there. That's a whole other level of delusion.
Yeah. Listen, when I look at Donald Trump and I look at these other candidates, I feel like, okay, he is the person who got these justices in place and accomplished the long-term goals.
Exactly.
So I do think, he is the one that opened up this new, in my opinion, absolutely horrific, unconscionable landscape, which has been devastating for Republicans at the polls when people have actually gone and voted. But if you're someone who that issue was core, I do think he gets a lot of credit for that. And so it does give him a lot of bandwidth to say things that other politicians couldn't get away with. And it's Donald Trump. He gets away with saying things all the time that other politicians couldn't get away with. They're still trying to navigate this issue. I actually thought Chris Christie did a little bit better last night than he did in the first debate. But it's just very hard. Listen, the winner of this debate was Donald Trump.
No question.
Or like Asa Hutchinson for not making the stage and not having to participate in this madness. But the thing that always stands out to me too is, while there were some jabs at Trump about him not being there, whatever, they trained way more of their fire on each other. On Vivek and Nikki in particular. And Nikki, she's the one candidate who got a little bit of a bump from the first debate. So clearly Tim Scott in particular had it out like, I gotta take her down. I gotta be the donor favorite. I gotta rise in the polls and, have my moment or whatever, which he's just not an attacker. It's not natural to him. And he didn't land any of it effectively, really. A lot of jabs at Vivek, who also has, sort of hung in there as like a solid third. He's risen to be about third place in the most polls behind Ron DeSantis. And so there was a lot of fire trained at him. Still not a lot of fire trained at Ron DeSantis for whatever reason. But you're just looking at this. This is part of why this whole thing feels so pointless. Is like the guy who is overwhelmingly winning, you're barely talking about him and you're barely punching at him whatsoever. And these attacks on like, I wish it was a potent attack to be like, you're not here and you should justify yourself to the voters. I've just never seen it actually really be politically salient, really land a strong political blow. Because I've seen this attempt many times, because oftentimes incumbents, unfortunately, feel like they don't have to debate and it would lower themselves to have to talk to the voters or have to meet their challenger. And, challengers always try to make an issue of it. And I've just never really seen it work out.
We had a poll from our friends over at Jail Partners. that they did for the Daily Mail, and unsurprisingly, people basically felt the same way that we did. They said, quote, who is the real winner of the second presidential debate? Number 1, Donald Trump, 27%. Number 2, Vivek Ramaswamy at 26%. It's funny, I'm not sure I agree with that or not. In a traditional way, I do, just because I'm always like, okay, if the new guy is getting fire and he's getting the second amount of speaking time, that's the metric that I used last time around. Guess what? Didn't matter at all. Literally hasn't seen a single rise in a poll, a substantive poll in any average that we saw afterwards. So, okay. Then Ron DeSantis at 17%, and then a smattering of Nikki Haley's, Mike Pence's, Tim Scott's, Chris Christie's. I mean, outside of the loser, again, being all of us who wasted our time on this entire thing, I don't think Nikki Haley came off particularly well last night. I'm curious what you think. I thought that she came across, it was a canned moment where she tried to go against Vivek. She was trying to recreate her moment of like, you don't have any foreign policy experience, and it shows. With the like, you know, every time you speak, I feel dumber, or something like that. I did not find anything that she didn't have a moment. To be honest, none of them really had moments.
No, there was very hard to point to any breakout moment from anyone, really. It was just a mess. The whole thing was just a mess. No one stood out. And so I agree with you on Nikki Haley. You know, I thought she had, putting the substance aside, because I did a whole thing about like her foreign policy, I think is atrocious, et cetera, et cetera. But I thought she had a strong first debate, and I thought she really exceeded expectations. I thought she was strong, she was clear, she was unafraid of mixing it up. I thought she was the one person who really kind of put Vivek in his place, you know, and had won the exchange, even again, putting the substance of the issue aside. And she needed a follow-up performance. She needed to show it wasn't a flash in the pan. She needed to consolidate that increase in the polls, that bump in fundraising interest that she had after the first debate. And she failed to do that. So in that way, I do sort of feel like maybe she's the biggest loser just because she had something to lose here in terms of being the new donor favorite, the new media darling, et cetera. And she definitely did not deliver a similar level of performance as she did in the first debate. You know what it reminds me a little bit of? Kamala Harris.
Yes, absolutely.
She had that first debate back in 2020. That little girl was me. She had the whole moment. She delivered it well. It had an impact. She genuinely went up in the polls. We forget now, but she went up in the polls. That was her highest level during the whole campaign. And so it was like, oh, maybe she can, you know, build on this. And then there was never another moment because you know, those scripted attack lines, those scripted, you know, sort of like fakely generated moments, they're hard to pull off more than once.
Yes.
So I feel like Nikki was able to pull it off in the first one, and the second one not able to land it, and just ended up looking less adult, less presidential. Part of that is she was taking more incoming from other people or whatever. But I do think that this, if you had to pick a loser, I would probably pick Nikki Haley outside of like literally everyone. I think I could see her slipping back in the polls and, you know, it being a little more muddled who is going to be the donor favorite going forward. And the reality is, too, I think a lot of these donors who were hoping to have a Trump alternative are kind of giving up at this point.
Yeah. I mean, and they should give up. I mean, look, in the current, you know, Real Clear Politics average, where do Trump stand? He stands at 56%. Ron DeSantis doesn't even come close. He's at 14.4%. Haley then is number 3 at 5.8, and Ramaswamy is at 5.1. Even in Iowa, and for anybody who wants, we did a breakdown on this as well during our debate preview. Yeah. Trump in Iowa is at 49. DeSantis is at 16. Trump in New Hampshire is at 44. Haley is at 13. I mean, we're looking at a clean sweep really across everywhere. Another thing that people are forgetting in the Republican primary, the California primary is now in Super Tuesday, and the current allocation of the vote count looks like Trump is going to sweep every single delegate out of California, which would effectively clinch the nomination like 3 weeks into the actual primary.
Yeah.
The calendar right now and the way the primary process works in terms of the allocation of delegates and all that, this man, it will not be in any way like a long contest. It's not going to be Obama 2008. It's not going to be, you know, Clinton in 92 or W even in 2000. It's just like, it almost seems over before it began, which is, it's difficult, you know, in order to treat it with this level of seriousness. This all just made me really think of like watching a JV squad, like a JV squad practice.
That's what it felt
almost.
like.
That's what it felt like.
Yeah, that is absolutely what it felt like. And it's depressing, you know, as people who care about politics and think this stuff matters and, you know, want to like sort through the policy differences and have people we actually potentially like respect and admire to be possibly president of the United States. It's depressing that on neither side do you have a real contest. You know, I do think it's like a bigger meta point about the decline of our democracy that makes you feel like do we even have any real choices here? Because neither of the frontrunners, Joe Biden or Donald Trump, are willing to actually subject themselves to a democratic process, and there's nothing to force them to. And so it's every other presidential election in my whole life, you've had these debates mean something and matter. And even though they can be silly and political theater and they're all putting on makeup with their can, talking points, whatever, at least there was something there to talk about. There was some sense that these issues were consequential, that you had people that were weighing them, that what they said on the stage might matter at all. And now you just don't have any of that whatsoever. And so it really is depressing. I think it's a sign of the decay and decline of our society, frankly.
Sad, as one politician who was not there once had to say. We've got Ryan and Emily standing by. We're gonna have a nice power panel. We're gonna have them in for the rest of the show. We're just gonna have a lot of fun. So we'll post this one a little bit early, both for our premium subscribers and for everybody else. Everybody else, stay tuned. We're gonna have a lot of great content for the rest of the day. We'll see you in a bit.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.